I want to talk about a topic today on the 5th anniversary of Flesh and Blood. Today, 5 years ago, Welcome to Wraith Alpha was released, and that was the birth of Flesh and Blood. Today I want to dive into 10 reasons why I think Flesh and Blood is the best game on the market right now. At number 10, you don't need to buy every single set. What I like about Flesh and Blood a lot, and why I think it's doing well, is that you don't need to keep up with every single set that comes out. The sets are hero and talent based, so every set that you buy is focused on classes like warrior or rune blades or something else. And that means that if you're not playing one of those classes or those heroes, then you can skip it. Most cards in that set, they don't interest you. You can just put it to the side and you can wait for the next set. You don't have to chase every single set. You don't have to worry about all the cards in that set. And I think that's a really good way of treating the player base. It shows respect that you don't want people to have to buy every single one of your products. That's a really good thing that LSS are doing here, and one of the reasons why Flesh and Blood is actually doing well. Point number 9 is adjacent to point number 10, the expansion slot. And if you don't know, the expansion slot is a specific slot in a pack, in a set that is dedicated to a class that is not in the theme of the main set. If you think that, for instance, heavy hitters, heavily featured warriors, guardians and brutes, then you can have an expansion slot, you can have a card for Runeblade or for Mechanologist. That means then, even though you're maybe not interested in the main set as itself because the theme doesn't speak to you, you don't care about the classes, you don't care about the heroes, but you do care about your hero and your class, you may still get a card that actually excites you. And in a game like Flesh and Blood, where you identify a lot with your hero and your class, I think that's awesome, because players like me, who stand for Brute or Rhinar in my case, all you want is to get a good card for that hero. And we get it. And sometimes these cards are actually the best cards that you get for that hero in a long time. So as an example, recently we received Shadow Realm Horror for Shadow Brutes Solevaya. It's one of the best cards you've seen in a while. Or we got Splatter Skull for Rhinar in Rosetta, and it's an awesome card. Does it necessarily make the hero good to where it can compete in the meta? No, not necessarily, but it's still really good that they're sprinkling in cards even if you don't care about the classes in the set that much, and they're actually good cards that you wanna care about. Indeed, indeed, except if you're brutes, then if you just suffer from being mediocre. Well, if the class is mediocre, you know, maybe even the card that you get is not gonna fix that. But I think we can't argue away that Splatter Skull and Shadow Realm Horror are great cards, even if the hero or the class is a little bit underpowered. Point number 8 is full art hero marvels. They just look absolutely freaking awesome. And what I love about marvels and the full arts is that they are completely optional, right? Card doesn't add anything to the game. It doesn't change anything. And the full art marvel heroes are stunningly beautiful. You just have the backside of the card, which is art, the name of the hero, nothing else. It looks stunning. And then with that cold foil, I really like what they do here for people that they love their hero specifically, what they do for collectors, and add something that is exciting to open up without you actually having to worry about not getting a card that is essential for your game plan but is really expensive. And so the way that they add something that is special to open up, that is awesome art, and that makes opening up packs interesting, while not influencing the gameplay experience, is really good. I really love that. And I think, just as a side note, that I want to add to point number 8 here is the art in Flesh and Blood. Always is good, sometimes is great, and in a few cases is absolutely fantastic. It's like the art is amazing and they keep getting better at it. all due respect to them. They know what they're doing there, and I feel like as they're getting more budget to put into art assets, you can see that they're willing to make sure that these cards look good. No disrespect to any other card games, but I see some art out there and go like, I see what you're trying to do, but it's just not as good. Point number 7 is the different play patterns when you change between class and heroes. What I think is amazing about this game is the fact that if you change between heroes and especially classes as well, and a class you can have different heroes, the play patterns are so distinctively different in some cases that it feels like a completely different game. So if you play a hero like Jane, and then you go into a hero like Vincent, even though they're both Runeblades, and they have similar ideas, they really play differently. But that's in the same class. Now, compare a hero like Dorinthia to a hero like Ozilio that I'm playing against right now. That is a wizard. So that's a warrior and a wizard. That's a completely different game. And you can play the same hero for a long time, and then you play something else and you have a complete opposite experience. And I really love that. It feels like a MOBA in that way, right? If I want to compare it to like Dota 2, and if I play like, let's say, the hero that I loved, Witch Doctor, and then you change a different hero with different abilities, it's like that. Or maybe a better comparison would be like a fighting game like Street Fighter. When you change it, it's so completely different. And you can love your hero and you play for a long time, and then you change over to something else and you're like, holy crap, this is a completely different game. And that's really good about this game. I think other games, they have much more predictable play patterns. Not all of them, I'm not saying that. All I'm saying is Flesh and Blood is really good at giving you that experience that when you change over a hero, you have a different experience. Point number 6, the well-structured, organized play system that Flesh and Blood has. It's really well thought through. There are different levels, from the lowest level where you just play with your friends at the local LGS or pub with like a small incentive, it's a tournament, but you know, nothing is on the line. And then from there, it goes progressively up, and it's really clear what like the steps are, right? So you go from an armory to a skirmish, to a road to nationals, to a pro quest, to a calling, to a battle hard, and to a pro tour to world. It's really well structured, and I feel like the organized play system in Flesh and Blood has something for every level of competitiveness. Does everybody want to win a pro tour? Probably, but realistically, you know, there's not a lot of people that have time to dedicate to this. It's an interesting fact that a lot of the Pro Tour winners of the last 4 Pro Tours were actually unemployed or had a job that let them focus on practicing Flesh and Blood a lot before they went into that Pro Tour, right? And that makes sense because in Flesh and Blood, you really get back what you put in. The more practice, the more high quality practice you get into the game, the better you get at it, and the more you get out as well. It is very skill intensive. It really rewards that skill. But I'm getting off topic. All I want to say is the 6th reason on the list that I have for why I think Flesh and Blood is the best game is because the organized play system is really good, especially considering it is a very competitive player-oriented game. You know, if you have a game that is for very competitive players and the organized play system is not good, you've got a disconnect there. So that they have both is really, really good. Let's move on to the 5th point on my list. We've reached half point. The open communication that we're getting from LSS, which is the company behind Flesh and Blood, of course. They are very, very transparent about their thinking of the design of the game, about bannings, about restrictions, about what they're doing and why they're doing it. They have a podcast on YouTube where the developers talk about the state of the game and what they see happening. And James White is just so vocal about his thoughts, what he's doing, what is happening, what is coming up. It's really, really refreshing to see somebody that leads a company like LSS actually be so open at what they're doing. You could expose yourself potentially here to backlash if people don't like it, but I think one of the reasons why the game is doing so well, and even if cards are being banned that are pretty expensive, the community reacts positively because the communication is there and it makes sense. And they say, we made a mistake. We're sorry, we made a mistake. We're trying to correct that mistake. And we designed this card 3 years ago. We've moved on in our design philosophy. We've done things differently. We didn't think we're going to go down this way, or, and this card just doesn't make sense anymore. And now Art of War, your, I don't know, $40, $50 card is banned, and that could have been a crap storm, right? But it went over so well, as opposed to bannings in a different card game a few weeks ago that was received completely different. And I think the difference is, why are you banning it? How transparent are you? And how honest are you about what's going on? Moving on to point number 4. Flesh and Blood is such a fantastic game, and the best game right now, because LSS is fully focused on the game. This is not just another TCG for them, like, let's say, Bandai, where you're just churning out those games, or let's say Hasbro, where it's just another game in your portfolio. No, this is like your reason for being. This is why you exist. This is what you do, and all your resources and all your focus goes into the game. There's no distractions, there's no side projects, there is no other game you're developing, there is no competing priorities. And I think a little bit what plays into it as well is that they're a private company, so they don't just have to maximize stakeholder value. They can do what they think is right and proper for the players and the game. And that's one of the huge reasons why the game is the best game, because they're doing what's right for the players and what's right for the game, and they're not doing what's right for the stakeholders. And that's keeping the game in a really, really fantastic place today on the 5th year anniversary of the game. Steelfur, they paused the other thing they were developing, PvE, to make sure they were doing the main game better. Is that actually known? Like, did they say that? But I was talking about that earlier as well, and that was my theory as well, that they put this aside and said, like, let's focus on what we do, let's do it correctly, and then when we got this down and we feel like we have the capacity and we have the headspace, then let's talk about this again. But instead of putting something out there that's half-baked, let's focus on our core product. Because PvE, while it is a great idea to bring in especially casual players, I think the game is lacking a little bit today. They need to really excel at this. Like, it can't be half-baked. It needs to be good, because otherwise it's going to be a problem. They're going to be criticized a lot. Point number 3. Fab lore and the IP possibilities. I mentioned this in a different video already, that James White said they are an IP company. They're not just Flesh and Blood the game. That's not the vision that they have. And that might be a very lofty goal. Is that realistic? I don't know. But what I love about Flesh and Blood, and I think what really gives it an edge, is that it's not just a game in an IP that's already established, and that the game has then to adhere to the canon. So if you think about games that are in the Star Wars universe, or if you think about games that are in the One Piece universe, you can't go and just do wild stuff with your game. It all needs to connect to that story that's already out there. It needs to be canon, and you need to stay within the story, and you need to pay attention to that. And you probably also, you're not able to drive the story forward itself. Flesh and Blood can. Flesh and Blood is in the unique position that this IP is being used for nothing else, so they can drive forward the story of the game as they continue developing the game. And that makes the heroes and the world feel so much more personal. And that's so good in a game where people connect a lot with their heroes. Honestly, in this game, a lot of players, when their heroes go living legend, so they can't be played anymore because they've rotated out, so to say. This is actually a tragic situation for a lot of people, especially. I think that was especially felt when Dromai went living legend. People didn't actually know what they should play now, because they identified so much with their hero that they were like, well, what do I do now? And if I couldn't play Reiner anymore, or Brutes, like I don't even know what I play at that point. Then what's awesome is that the story of these heroes that we play and that we identify with, you can drive the story forward within the game and the lore around the game, instead of having to worry about something else, maybe TV shows, movies. And I think we saw the best example of this earlier in 2024 when we had the deathmatch season after Heavy Hitters released. So what they did was, in the ProQuest season, qualifiers for Pro Tour, every time one of the heroes would win one of the ProQuests, it went on a leaderboard. And the hero with the most points in the leaderboard, first of all, everybody that won there, they got a special card at the end of the season. And that actually drove the story of that hero forward. So they published an article accompanying that card that was printed for Kasai, which drove forward the story of the game world. How awesome is that? And you can't do that in a game where, let's say, you know, a game that was just announced like Gundam or One Piece or Star Wars Unlimited. Like, you know, you're never going to be able to do that. So that's absolutely fantastic. Absolutely fantastic. And that's why I see a lot of potential here and why a lot of people love this game, because it lets you identify with the heroes and the classes that you play, and you feel more invested. And for that reason, this is number 3 on my list why I think Flesh and Blood is the best game. Let's go to the second reason why I think Flesh and Blood is doing so well. And that is the community. I have never, in all the time that I've played Flesh and Blood, which is coming up on probably 3.5 years now, ever had a bad experience with any interaction with anybody in the Flesh and Blood community. It's always been positive. It's always been very welcoming. And I hear other stories from other TCGs where it's very different. And I've never experienced Flesh and Blood anything other than warm welcome. If you see that a new player is coming in, they're always being helped with cards that they need. People explain. People have patience. And I traveled the world for work a little bit, and I played games in LGS around the world, and it was never anything but amazing to meet the people, to share an evening with them, to play with them. It has never been a bad experience. And in a trading card game, especially that is as competitive as Flesh and Blood is, it could easily be very, very different. Like, it could be sweaty, and people just like looking for the last edge to win against new players and everything like that. And it could be very, very different. And it's amazing that it isn't. And a hobby that requires you to interact with people, the community is extremely important. You can't play a trading card game by yourself. You could play it at home at the table with your spouse or your siblings. But I think the game is designed to be played by a group of people at the local game shop or something like that. So I think that's the idea behind it. And then that there is this community that is welcoming to new people, that is that awesome, is a huge, huge important plus for the game. And that's why I put this at the second biggest reason why Flesh and Blood is so great. Let's move on into the biggest reason why Flesh and Blood is the best trading card game on the market right now. And that one is a pretty obvious one. It's the gameplay loop. It's hands down the best gameplay loop in any trading card game on the market. And I've played a few historic ones as well. I wouldn't claim to say I've played a lot, but I played some. And even compared to historic games, nothing feels quite as crunchy, as interesting, turn to turn, game to game as Flesh and Blood. There's other games out there which are interesting, which are entertaining. But the way that I would explain to somebody how I feel about them is like, it was pleasant. I played Star Wars Unlimited, I played Magic, I played Lorcana, I played One Piece, and it's a pleasant experience. But nothing is quite as tense and interesting on a turn-to-turn, on a game-to-game basis as Flesh and Blood. It's hands down the best gameplay loop of any game, trading card game that I've ever played. And at the end of the day, let's be honest about this, that's what's important. Like, you can make cool looking cards, you can, you know, do fancy things with your sets, you can have the best IP in the world. If you do not have a good gameplay loop, eventually you're probably not going to do well as a game. The most important thing about the game is that the game is good. I mean, it's a game and it needs to be playing well. And that's what Flesh and Blood does. And I can't think of any other game that I would, if I had the choice between sitting down to play a game of Flesh and Blood or another game, that I would rather play. I just want to play Flesh and Blood because it's the best game. And there's no debate for me here. It's the way that you need to decide with every card. Do I block? Do I attack? Do I pitch it to get resources to be able to play something? Do I save it for next turn? Do I go all out this turn? Do I take all the damage? Can I do more damage? Should I block and prepare for next turn? What is my game plan 3 turns down the road? Will I see my cards again or not? What game plan are they on? What are they trying to do? The puzzle is never ending. And I think the possibilities that we're facing with Flesh and Blood are better and more extensive than in other games. Again, I don't want to say other things are not doing things well as well. There's interesting things that other games do as well. But I will maintain that Flesh and Blood does it best out of all of them. And that's the biggest reason why Flesh and Blood is the best trading card game on the market right now in 2024. And I have no doubt that because of this reason, they will continue to be the best trading card game for quite some time yet to come.